Here we have the series of plastic Aquamatic diaphragm valves. The older series was the 520 series. Some of the older valves were blue in color. They've changed them to black over the years. If you got a replacement valve and you want an identical valve, it would be black now instead of blue. These valves typically come with, these are straight threads on these valves, and there's any number of options we'll go into a little later. You can have union end fittings, you can have groove fittings, you can have tail pieces and what have you. I'll go into that later on. This 520 series starts from 1/2 inch and goes up to basically 2.5 inch valve. If you wanted to identify a particular valve, these aren't real easy to identify. That also has on it, this says it's 521A, that's the casting number of this body of the valve. At one time they did have some information that might have been on the top of the valve, but basically if you need to replace these valves, you have to say what size it is, whether, what type of top it has on it. If it has with a series of bolted on top, that gives enough some information we might be able to know. Alrighty, here we have this is the 520 series valve. We have a valve that's made into a cutaway so we can see what the internal parts look like. Again, the top of the valve is bolted on, and you'll have the diaphragm assembly with a internal shaft. This part right here, this is the retainer, the shaft retainer or shaft guide. Inside that guide there's an O-ring, a single O-ring seal. This O-ring right here that's shown, that seals that shaft guide against the body so you don't have leak by here. The valve, the stem is all one piece with a rubber seat on the bottom. Could be a different material depending on the application. Could be Viton or EPDM or Buna, depending on the application. So as air pressure goes on the top, air or water pressure on top of the valve, it pushes the diaphragm assembly down, closes the valve off. The valve opens up, relieve the pressure at the top, or you can control it both ways. On some sophisticated systems, it will have pressure going top and bottom of the diaphragm, so you can pressurize open or pressurize it closed.
And then you could have spring assist on those?
Yes, there's a lot of options. You can have a spring assist open, and you would have a spring that fits in this area here. You can have a spring assist closed. It would be on top here. You would have to be, the top of this valve would be slightly modified, so you can fit a spring in here. You can have on the top of the valve, this could be drilled out. This part of the valve can be drilled out for a limit stop if you want to limit opening of the valve. Typical end fitting on it, you had a couple options. One option was called a grooved end. Now, if you had grooved ends on both sides of the valve, if you had to take this valve out of service, you would literally have to disconnect the piping. You'd have to have a union somewhere in the piping because it's not a true union type of valve. What they did to counteract that situation, they made it into a true union valve. They added another connection on the valve. There's your straight connection on the body. And they added a socket weld fitting on the end of it instead of a threaded fitting. This would not be available on a true union valve. You wouldn't have a threaded end. There's no really any requirement for a threaded end. So you'd have a socket in. So this would then in turn make this a true union valve with this adapter piece. So if you had that on both sides, you can slide this valve in and out of the piping without disconnecting any of the piping.